Human senses report a universe of fractured parts, constant movement, and perpetual decay. But pure reason suggests something different. Strip away the raw data of your eyes and ears and rely solely on theoretical deduction. Reality fuses into a single, immovable, and eternal whole. This severe logical framework originated in the early 5th century BCE with Parmenides of Elea. He was the first thinker to establish the rules of formal ontology, the philosophical study of being and reality itself. Parmenides developed his theories in Elea, a Greek colony on the Tyrrhenian coast of southern Italy, a region known as Magna Graecia. While earlier Ionian philosophers tried to explain the cosmos by observing physical elements like water or fire, Parmenides discarded physical observation. In his metaphysical poem On Nature, he laid down a single, unyielding axiom: what is, and cannot not be. From this solitary premise, Parmenides proposed that we can determine the exact nature of true reality using a priori logic. A priori refers to knowledge derived strictly from theoretical deduction and reason, independent of sensory experience. He divided human understanding into two paths. The first is the way of opinion, which relies on sensory experience. Because our senses show us a world where things come into existence and fade away, a mixture of being and not being, Parmenides argued that sensory data is inherently contradictory. Following this logic to its limit, the physical realities we experience are exposed as cognitive illusions. Time, motion, and change cannot survive strict logical scrutiny. They are the flawed perceptions of temporary, contingent beings. The core of Parmenides' deduction rests on the paradox of negative existentials. It is a logical impossibility to think or speak accurately about what is not, because assigning a property to nothing treats it as a something. Thinking requires an object. You cannot have a thought about absolute nothingness. Therefore, nothing cannot exist as a concept in the mind, nor can it exist as a physical reality in the universe. When we apply this logic to the concept of empty space or a void, the physics of the era break down. This diagram shows a plenum, a space completely filled with matter, next to a hypothetical void. Because a void is, by definition, what is not, it cannot have boundaries or dimensions. Without dimensions, the concept of a gap collapses entirely. Following the deduction preserved in Fragment 8 of his poem, Parmenides shows that the impossibility of a void dictates the history of the universe. Because there is no nothing for what is to emerge from, reality cannot have been generated. It has nowhere to arise from. By the same geometric logic, the lack of a void means what is has nowhere to pass into. If reality cannot be generated and cannot be destroyed, it is permanently imperishable. Modern scholars often use the modal interpretation to parse this rigid system. This interpretation clarifies that Parmenides is categorizing different modes of existence, distinguishing between things that happen to exist and things that must exist. Under this framework, the way of truth describes necessary being, that which must exist and cannot undergo change. This is segregated entirely from mortal perception, which only grasps temporary, contingent phenomena that are true one moment and false the next. Pure reason demands reality to be an eternal, uniform absolute. By isolating existence as a subject of pure deduction rather than physical observation, Parmenides established metaphysics as a domain separate from physical cosmology. To defend this static monism against critics who pointed to the existence of plural objects and movement, Parmenides' student Zeno of Elea developed a series of mathematical traps. Zeno weaponized a specific argumentative method, reductio ad absurdum. This is a form of logical argument that adopts an opponent's premise strictly to show that it inevitably leads to a mathematical contradiction. Rather than arguing directly for a motionless universe, Zeno temporarily accepted the pluralist premise that motion exists, and then dismantled that framework from the inside out. Zeno's arrow paradox isolates a single instant of time. By halting forward momentum, we examine the physical state of the arrow in a frozen now. This diagram illustrates the paradox's core premise. At any given exact instant, the flying arrow occupies a space exactly equal to its own dimensions. It is not spread out, it is precisely where it is. The logical consequence is inescapable. A physical body occupying a space exactly equal to itself, with no room to move into during that specific instant, is, by definition, at rest. Expanding this logic across the timeline creates the contradiction. Since time is composed of these discrete nows, and the arrow is geometrically at rest in every individual now, the arrow is at rest at every single instant of its flight. Because the arrow is at rest in every conceivable instant, motion itself becomes logically impossible. Zeno concluded that movement is an illusion created by how our brains process reality. Parmenidean logic translates these spatial paradoxes directly into the temporal domain, questioning the existence of a progressive timeline. Parmenides issued a rejection of the past based on his core axiom: if a state of reality was, then it is not right now. He applied the same prohibition to the future: if a state of reality will be, then it is not right now. Both the past and the future rely on the concept of not being. To say something happened yesterday is to admit it does not exist today. Because non-existence violates the core Eleatic axiom that what is not cannot exist, past and future states are logical impossibilities. The resulting temporal state of reality is extreme. It exists strictly in a continuous, indivisible, and eternal present moment. There is no sequence of events, only a singular block of existence. This eternal, unchanging present sits in contrast to biological human experience. We perceive time passing and seasons changing, but Parmenides categorizes this as biological error. The Eleatic universe possesses no timeline or narrative progression. It is a static totality where all moments are locked into a singular, unchanging necessity. Because it cannot be divided by a void, the physical architecture of this absolute reality must be a continuous, homogeneous plenum. Every coordinate is entirely filled with what is, with no variation in density. Parmenides also addressed the concept of geometric limit, or paris. Reality is not infinitely sprawling. Because an infinite expanse lacks boundaries, it is incomplete. True reality must be complete, lacking nothing. From these constraints, Parmenides deduced the shape of existence. Since it is homogeneous and filled, it must be perfectly spherical, extending equally in every direction. This absolute geometry represents one of the earliest formulations of the mathematical continuum in Greek thought, replacing qualitative descriptions of nature with quantitative borders. This logical roadblock triggered an immediate philosophical backlash. Subsequent thinkers realized they could no longer rely on naive observation. They had to build systems capable of answering Eleatic deductions. Centuries later, Aristotle would dedicate substantial portions of his physics to resolving these paradoxes, attempting to redefine the concepts of infinity and continuous motion just to escape Zeno's traps. The early atomists, Leucippus and Democritus, were similarly forced into radical innovation. They invented the architecture of atoms and the void specifically to bypass Zeno's rules regarding infinite divisibility and motion. The Eleatic deduction forced Greek natural philosophy to mature. To save the phenomenon of change and motion, philosophers had to invent properly physical theories of composition. By systematically stripping away the contingent, changing world of the senses, Parmenides forced inquiry down a single path to reach what his poem called the unshaken heart of reality. By demanding that physical reality obey the strict rules of non-contradiction, the Eleatics established the formal disciplines of ontology and logic. Their unyielding logical rigor exposed the vulnerability of human observation, demonstrating that the deceptive arrangement of words in mortal opinion is often a description of sensory errors. They left behind a structural challenge that modern science still wrestles with. If you trust pure mathematics and deductive logic over sensory data, the universe looks profoundly different than it appears to the human eye. Beneath the chaotic, pluralistic illusion of daily life, pure logic dictates a universe that is singular, perfect, and absolutely still.